Hello, my fellow comic book collectors. Today is going to be a very special video. Um, I Every Wednesday I get a bunch of really great questions from my viewers, and every Wednesday I answer those questions. And there was one question that kind of stood out this week that I felt really deserved its own video. That it was, something that it was such a big topic that I kind of wanted to devote a whole video to it specifically. And it's regarding market manipulation. And the question comes from, and I'm going to read the question and then I'll get into it in depth. It comes from Matt Blogs. He asked, have you heard about the alleged, he puts it in brackets, fraudulent activity with the video game grading that Heritage were involved in? If not, watch Karl Jobst's video. I've heard the same people were also involved in suspicious VGS grading. Does knowledge of this affect your confidence in buying comics from Heritage? Could they also be manipulating the graded comic prices? So I'll get into this a little bit. So first of all, Jobst, Karl Jobst, he did a pretty in-depth video. I mean, it's like an hour long, real expose kind of style video where he gets into pretty much all the details surrounding Heritage and Wata. So Wata is the company that does the grading for video games. And he looked at past auctions that happened, and he looked at this very odd connection between Heritage and Wata. And as it's an hour-long video, it is highly worth watching. I will link to it in my description because I recommend you go watch that video because I'm going to be giving almost the Cole's notes of it. I'm not, there's no way I can give as much detail as he did. And the kind of, it almost reminded me when watching this video of, in the movies, you always see these people, they put like the pictures up on the wall, and then they put like pieces of string between those pictures and they sort of connect all the dots and like you see this crazy like thing. Well, he does that with his video in a way. Not really that way, but he connects a whole bunch of things that kind of leads to an overall pattern. And the pattern does not look good for Heritage and Wata. So I kind of wanted to get into a little bit about that. So the two people that I guess would be the highest, involvement in this kind of maybe conspiracy, I'll leave it as a conspiracy. I don't want to say that they were fraudulent in what they were doing, but it's highly suspicious. Okay. And this was all revealed within Karl Jobst's video. So I recommend watching that. But the two big guys are Dennis Kahn, who is the owner of Wata Games, and that's the company that grades all the video games, and his relationship with Jim Halpern. And I'll explain that kind of interesting relationship. So basically, Wata was not the first grading company for video games. There was a video game grading, I think it's VGA or something like that, association. So Video Game Grading Association was the first, and I could be wrong. I think it's that's the acronym. So they were, grading video games for many, many years. And then Wata came around, and it was the new kid on the block. And before they had even graded one video game, they formed an alliance with Heritage. So Heritage became their avenue for selling video games. And this is kind of weird. So, before, usually if you're an auction house, what you're trying to do, the reason Heritage kind of partners up with CGC is they want to, show that the things that they're bringing to auction are legitimate. They're using the CGC status as a grading company to legitimize the things that they're putting up for auction. Because if you can trust that the grades are good, that the quality of the books are good, then you can, as an auction house, you can say, hey, this is a graded comic. We know how much it's worth based on the grade, and people will bid accordingly. Well, the same applies to to video games. So usually, you want to make that kind of alliance just for that purpose, and that there can be legitimate reasons for that. However, it doesn't make sense when you have a situation where you make an alliance with a grading company that has never done any grading. Like, it is a literally brand new company, has no reputation for grading games and grading games professionally, where they can say, hey, look, we've graded millions of games, we know what we're doing. You can trust that if you get this certification on the game, that it means that it is of that quality. So that was kind of something that he was kind of saying that's a little weird. Now, another thing that's weird is the other guy. So Jim, I can never say his name, Halpernin. And Jim, he's kind of like one of the people that actually established, he's one of the co-founders of Heritage Auctions. So Heritage Auctions has been around since 1976. It's a well-established company. And Halperin, he's got a bit of scandal. He's got a bit of a history, and a little bit of a shady past. He was involved with the market manipulation of the 80s with coins. And, there was kind of a bubble that happened in the coin market where really coins, and I'm a coin collector, I kind of remember this, where all of a sudden they were being graded, and all of a sudden, there was like a similar kind of thing that we saw in the comic book industry where there was graded coins, and you'd get like a little case and it would say this coin is of certain grade. Well, what happens is, as a grading company, often they'll take a percentage of the value of the coin in order to charge you for the grading process. And CGC does this with comics. And it's something I never liked. I never liked the idea that they would take a percentage of the value of the comic, because they are then more likely to grade higher. Because like if I grade a Batman 1 and it's like, a 2.5, but I grade it as a 3 or 3.5, well, we're talking thousands of dollars worth of commission that you can charge extra just for the fact that there's a bump in the grade, because you can charge that based on the grade. So I never thought that was a good policy for grading companies. I think it always should be a flat rate. If it's an older book, sure, you can charge a small premium, maybe $100, $200. And if the general value is over, let's say, $10,000, you can charge an additional premium, maybe charge like $500, or if it's over 100,000, maybe charge like $500. But no more than that. I wouldn't say that it then, based on the grade, you can get these like really, because like even the difference between a 9.6 and a 9.8 is literally hundreds of thousands of dollars in some of these big books, or millions of dollars. So I think that there is that tendency of overgrading when you have that incentive to overgrade. So I don't like that. But going back to the video game thing, this is how they can make money. If you can make the value of video games higher, if you can sort of manipulate the market to sort of hype it up, well, and then you're charging a percentage, well, then you can make good money because basically you're charging a percentage, and as the product goes up and more, and the demand goes up, because if what happens is, if you see like $1 million sale for Mario Brothers video game, then everyone's like, oh, I have Mario, I have whatever games, they might be worth something, and everyone will flood to get their games graded. And because the prices get inflated, then what'll happen is they're getting more and more money, more customers, and more money per game that they grade. So it's a very good situation if you're a grading company. Now, if you're an auction house, typically grading companies will charge like 2-3%, something like that. Auction houses, like if you go to Heritage, the buyer's premium, which is the price that they actually charge above the sale price of the book, is 20%, and they still charge the seller 5% commission as well. So they're skimming 25% of the value of the book. So if the book goes up to $3 million, well, that's a huge commission that they get. So, that's a $75,000 commission. So lots of incentive for them to, $750,000 commission. Big money we're talking about here, for that kind of price range, increase. So the one example that he mentioned in the video, so I really strongly recommend you check out Karl Jobst's video. The one example that was very suspicious was this partnership, as I said. But what happened was, one of the first games that had sold in the past and for record amounts was Super Mario Brothers. So there was this unopened Super Mario Brothers of the highest caliber, so a 9.8 of video games, and that it's rare, relatively rare. We don't know how rare, because video games aren't as don't have the history that a lot of the other things do. Like comics, we kind of know the edition numbers a bit more. We know how many on the census there are. With video games, those numbers are not so transparent. I mean, there are sites that do hold those numbers, but it's not as active because a lot of these grading companies are relatively new, especially with Wata. They're brand new. So what happened was, there was a usual going rate for Mario, unopened and high grade, goes for about 30,000. Now, what happened was, there was an auction where this same $30,000 video game ended up selling for $100,000. Now, one of the people that bought the game was Jim Halpener. So very strange. And then that same game was the one that was brought to Heritage Auctions and sold for the record $1 million. So that was highly suspicious, because what happened was, the video game, after it sold for $100,000, it was, it was basically a press junket at that point, where they said, oh, look, video games are hot. Look, everyone's investing in video games. And there was a lot of hype. And for that same auction house to be involved with the sale of that game seems highly suspect. It's a little bit of a conflict of interest. So it's like me saying, I'm the grader of this thing. I can say, oh, it's a 9.8, and I'm the company that buys the product for whatever price, and then says that it's worth 10 times that, and then puts it up on my other site and says, hey, look, you should buy this because it's worth 10 times more, 100 times more. So a little bit strange, a little bit messed up. So there's a lot more details that he gets into, but the main gist is these kind of weird situations that happen between who is buying these video games. So the video game collecting market is actually not that young. It's actually a very old thing. There's many collectors that have been collecting for decades. And you would think that within that kind of field, it's a smaller field. It's not as big as comics. But there would be a sort of an established prices and established kind of grading system and established sort of market. And what we're seeing is, it's not those people who are making these purchases. It's not like there's some game collector that's like, oh, I gotta have this game because it will complete my Super Mario collection. Like, it's not that. It's speculators that are buying. So generally, the market for the most prestigious game was that 30,000. That was the peak. So for it to go into that $1 million stratosphere doesn't seem very logical. Like the market isn't there. Um, so what we're seeing is not that it's video game collectors that are getting involved. We're seeing more of this market manipulation and people who are speculators getting involved. So we had the same thing happening within the comic industry. And I actually mentioned this earlier in an earlier video of mine where I was very nervous about some of the potential within the comic industry for speculators to really disrupt the comic market. And I believe that we did see this within the last 3 years, where the market overall was being manipulated. And it was being manipulated by a group of people who moved into the comic industry, like comic collecting industry, as a means of hedging their bets and investing. So a good example of this is a company called Otis. And what Otis will do is they'll buy expensive books like Batman 1 or Detective 27 or Amazing Fantasy. And what they do is they buy those big books and then they will offer shares on those books. So I can't afford a 9.6 of Amazing Fantasy, 15, but I can afford a share in that comic. So a share might cost you $100. Well, that's affordable. And there will be like several thousand people that'll have each one share or many shares in that one comic. And if the value of that comic goes up, well, then as a shareholder, like if it goes from being $1 million comic to a $3 million comic, well, my share has tripled in price. And as an investor, I've done well. Okay. So there's an incentive for these companies like Otis to basically buy big books and then flip big books. Because what happens is if they can flip it at a constantly higher price, then they can show, hey, investors, look what we've done. We've kind of raised your money. But it's a bit of a Ponzi scheme. And if you're familiar with Ponzi schemes, it's basically what you do is you use your investors' money to pay your investors. So you use future investors to pay for your past investors. And you keep on doing that in order to kind of hide the fact that you're really not making any money. Well, you can do the same with comics and this kind of scheme of investing in big books. You buy a big book, you get a bunch of people to invest, and then you sell that big book, or you even buy it again. You can buy your same book, and just say, oh, look, it's gone up. But really, you're not, it's the same book. It's just that it's gone up because you paid more for it. So you're using that hype to say, hey, look what we've invested in. Look how much money you make, and to encourage the investors to invest more money into other products that you might be offering. So it's a way of that's how Ponzi schemes work. And I'm worried that one of the sales that I saw really shocked me. And I said to people at the time when I saw this sale, I don't think this is legit. I really don't think it's legit. And it was a sale for Amazing Fantasy where it sold for 3.6 million. Now, I don't know who bought it, but if I'm a collector, I would know that Amazing Fantasy, there's about 3,000 copies that are graded on the census. That's a lot. Like, as a Golden Age collector, I see 3,000 and I think, wow, that's a lot of copies of a book. That means that book is not very rare. Like some of the Golden Age books that I have, there's less than 10 on the census. And it's not that people haven't bothered getting them graded. It's just that there's not that many of them. They're really rare. Action 1, less than 100 on the census. it is a rare book. That's why it's so valuable. 2,000 on the census, not that valuable. Now, for it to go at roughly almost 3 or 4 times what normally it had sold for is very strange, because not only was it not the highest grade, because usually, like, if there's one of, like, if it's the highest grade and there's nobody that has a higher grade, there are collectors out there that will pay that premium because they want the book, the hottest, not only is it Amazing Spider-Man #1, first appearance of Amazing Spider-Man, but it's also the highest graded copy. So that makes it something a little bit special. And sometimes you can get a little bit crazy prices because all you need is one or two bidder, like actually 2 or 3 bidders, ideally just 2, that will want that book no matter what. Doesn't matter how much it costs. And they'll jack the price up. But this is not the case with Amazing Fantasy 15. It was not the highest graded comic. There are actually 3 comics of either equal or higher grade. So, why would you pay an extreme premium on a book when there's a potential for somebody to have a higher grade, or there's a potential for somebody to have an equal grade? Just doesn't make sense. So, and it's not like this book doesn't come up for auction. It does come up for auction. So I think there is that fear with collectors that this might have been not a collector buying, but a speculator or a company that is an investment in comics investing in it. Now I tried to find out who is the one that bought this book, but I couldn't find it. Like there's no, it's always a secret behind, it's behind the scenes. We don't know who bought the book. And you can do the Google searches. I tried, and I could not find who bought that Amazing Fantasy 15. But here's the problem. What happens is, because there's that record sale, every book that's under that record sale experiences the same kind of lift in prices. And what you'll see is a book, like I paid my copy of Amazing Fantasy, and you can see it right there. Wait, how do I do this? Right there. Okay. Wait, sort of, no, more that way. Okay. Here, I'll turn the thing. There. Now you can see it. Okay. So mine's a 3.0. It is missing like a coupon. It's like missing a coupon. Doesn't affect story. I paid $10,000 for mine. Okay. Now that same book today would be a $30,000 to $40,000 book. I'm kind of giving it that range just because it is missing a coupon. It doesn't affect story. So the point is, I bought that 2 years ago, and for it to be going up 3 times, when historically, if you look at, you gotta go and check Amazing Fantasy's sales history. It is a book that is very erratic. It goes up, it goes down. It goes up, it goes down. But the overall trend wasn't really that good. It was like kind of a very, not like, what you want to see is kind of that steady rise, that sort of calm rise. But it is like, goes up, crash, goes up, crash. It's just all over the place. I thought $10,000 for the book, a fair price. And I still think that's a fair price. No, I wouldn't sell it for that because I want to keep it. But my point is, I don't think the current prices that we're seeing are fair based on the scarcity of the book. Now, sure, the demand is there. Now, let's get back to the video games. And this is why I'd be very skeptical about investing even a penny into the video game, especially these higher valued video games, because what at least is a kind of buffer to the comic one. So let's say there is manipulation that's happening. Well, with the comics, there are still collectors like myself. I'm a collector. I love my books. I won't sell them. I cling to them. I'm a true collector. And I'm not the only one. There's like a million people like me that collect comics, love comics, and will chase after the big books. Um, However, with these video games, you don't have that. You have a, a market that's small, that, as I said, maybe the cap on the top that the collectors within that market would be willing to pay is maybe 30,000. That's kind of the scope of that market. And then you have these $1 million games, and those are purely bought not by collectors but by speculators. So if all of a sudden the speculators are like, well, this is not a good speculation, what ends up happening is it goes back down to where the real market is. So the real market is here, the speculators are way over here. It's going to drop back down to where the market actually is. Fortunately, in comics, even though I think that the Amazing Fantasy 15 is overpriced, I still don't see it dropping down to nothing. I see it as being one of those things that might drop down a bit, maybe drop to 2.5. That's that's actually pretty substantial, but it's not like it'd be worthless. I do see that you could have that effect where these books could drop just because it's not a scarce book. It even though there is the market, it just isn't scarce enough to be. What happens is, and I got to explain markets a little bit on this, is pretty much anyone that likes Spider-Man will want an Amazing Fantasy 15, because we love the character. But just because we love the character doesn't mean we're willing to shell out 10,000, 20,000, 100,000 for the book. We might be willing to shell out 5,000. That's reasonable. Maybe we could do that. That's like a lot of money still. So what ends up happening is each bracket where it goes up from 5 to 10 to 15 to 20, each bracket, the market, even though there's a huge number of people that like that character, the market that can actually afford that book gets smaller and smaller. So what ends up happening is once you get into that $1 million range, well, the market is not millions of people that love Spider-Man anymore. It's a few people. Like we're talking like 10, 20 people that have the money, have the desire to pay that much for the book. And that is the problem. But at least within the comic market, there is that market at that higher range. In the video game thing, no way. There's not that elite group of collectors that exist in the video game market. The ones that are buying it, the big buyers, are not true collectors. And I see it as something that will correct. And if you're invested in games now, get out. Trust me, you're going to be thanking me for it. And once the market corrects, because what ends up happening is the people that are like the grading companies and Heritage might be making money hand over fist with this situation, but the collectors or people that speculate into it, they're the ones that are going to be left holding the bag and be like, oh, I bought $1 million video game, and there's a whole bunch of them that come onto the market, and it's like, well, this is worthless. It's like, and there's no collectors that are willing to spend that kind of money. Why would they? So that's something to understand. So this has kind of been my take on the market manipulation, and how does it make me feel about Heritage? So I do worry that not only you have this kind of situation where certain books I do believe are getting pushed up. And there was a story that David from Comic Book Investments said that is very troubling. And I wanted to say this story. You can check out his channel, Comic Book Investments, where he basically looks at comics and with his father's eyes. And what I mean by that is his father was a big vendor of comics. He was a big, really into selling comics during the 80s, 60s, I believe from the 60s all the way into the 80s, 90s, and maybe even to the 2000s. Um, and then he started working for Heritage. He worked for Heritage for 2 years. And so he knew Jim um, Harpin, Halpernin, Halpernin. He knew him on a personal basis, and he observed that Jim would take books from his own collection, because this guy is one of the biggest collectors of comics. He would take comics from his own collection, put them up on Heritage, and then he would buy them back and then put them back into his collection. And what that would do is he could artificially or do what's called a shill bid and just raise the price of that comic on purpose, just to increase not only the hype in the market, but also the value of the rest of his comics, because people would say, oh, the market is really strong. So there was some suspicious activity happening. Now, take that story with a grain of salt. I recommend you go to Dave and David from Comic Book Investments and say, hey, what's the truth behind the story? Is this true? And I think he would say he'd back up his words because he's a good guy. So my point is that there can be this kind of market manipulation happening, which does make me a little nervous with Heritage. Fortunately, the types of books that I'm buying, for me, are ones that are typically fairly rare and that might not see light of day for a few years. Like, they're like rarer books, and they're books that I'd be happy to have in my collection, even if they might drop down in value. So I'm willing to take that risk because I want those rare books in my collection. So it's a little different philosophy for me. But if you're a person who is trying to buy and sell and use this as an investment, you might be putting yourself at risk. And I always recommend that arm yourself with knowledge, find out what the fair market price is, find out everything you can about the book and its history. One thing that we have going for us as comic collectors is that because books nowadays are almost a commodity, when they are slabbed, they have that provenance with them. You can look up the number that's on the slab and see what it sold for, who bought, the kind of activity that happened for that one particular book. So you can see, is there something shady happening where it's kind of going back and forth between maybe a couple hands that might seem like manipulation. So we can do that kind of research and kind of protect ourselves from this market manipulation that might or might not be happening. I'm not putting any accusations out there because I like Heritage auctions. I use them all the time. There's going to be an unboxing that I'll do. You'll see that on Thursday, where it's a Heritage unboxing. And I was happy to get those books from Heritage because I think they're a good company. It's just this one guy maybe a bit iffy. And so what I recommend is always bid responsibly, I guess. They always say, geek responsibly. Well, in this case with Heritage, bid responsibly. Those are some of my thoughts. What do you guys think about market manipulation? Do you think it's happening? And do you think it's happening within the comic book industry? I'm sure a lot of people are very familiar with the concept of shill bids. Have you had any experience with kind of weird manipulation of comics, either on eBay or any of these other auction houses? What do you think about the comic market in general? So I'd love to hear your feedback about that. And do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching. Bye for now.